Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that tackles constitutional, human rights and legal issues, bringing you information and analysis. My name is Dumile Mateza. Remember, you can also be part of our discussion today by tweeting us at Rights Recourse. Alternatively, email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. On the 25th of April 1969, an ANC conference was held in Tanzania, the Morogoro Consultative Conference. Its main task was undoubtedly to bring about organizational changes, a new framework and structure. There were many questions raised, discussed, and partly resolved at the Morogoro Conference. Central to all and most burning was the problem of reaching the fighting front. Relevant to this and basic to it were problems of internal organization. Today on Rights and Recourse, ahead of its National Elective Conference, we take a hard look at the vanguard movement and the challenges facing it. The tension in Parliament on the ANC benches is palpable, and when these tensions show so clearly, what happens to service delivery? The saying, when two elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers, rings true. Could the African National Congress be at a crossroads? To discuss today's topic, we are joined in the studio by Mr. Mavuso Msimang, ANC veteran, and from our Durban studio, we're joined by Mr. Lukhona Mnguni, an independent analyst attached to the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to your...
Good afternoon, Mr.
Mr. Mavuso, let me start with you. I'm saying here, is the African National Congress at a crossroads?
The African National Congress is currently definitely at a crossroads. What has led to this is a series of things, but in particular, we have managed to put into leadership people who are not really well grounded in the values of the African National Congress, certainly the majority of them. There have been crises which have been evidenced by, more recently, the loss of confidence by the electorate in the ANC, as was witnessed in 2016 when we lost virtually
the local government elections.
That was a real shocker to the ANC. That would strike everybody hard on its core. You can't, as an ANC, lose the key metropolitan municipalities and think there is no crisis. But of course, we've also had a crisis of leadership in which our president has consistently been featured in scandal, in things to do with corruption, etc., etc. And against that background, you've had a problem of the collective around him not really being able to hold him accountable. So this has precipitated the crisis that we have.
Mr. Mnguni, I don't know whether you want to weigh in on that. I used a metaphor or an idiom, an English idiom, as saying, when two elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. That might ring true because service delivery suffers.
Certainly that saying is relevant, not to what is going on today in the ANC. Let's go 10 years back. That's when the ANC was at a crossroads. Now it's a manifestation of having not made the proper decisions at that moment. They were at a crossroads. I hear veteran Msimang talking about corruption scandals really that do feature the president. Already in 2007, these were there, and the majority of the movement still saw it fit to actually opt for this individual as the president of the ANC, really in what was a pact of convenient politics and political expediency by a number of groupings that now are suddenly against the president, including your SACP and COSATU in the main. So I think what we are seeing today is not an ANC at a crossroads. It's an ANC that is ultimately confronted with its possible political death. And the biggest question is whether, if we're to say it is in ICU, is it able to be resuscitated or not back into political life as the so-called leader of society in South Africa? And really, that is the biggest question that confronts the ANC today.
Mr. Msimang, the veterans have consistently called for a consultative conference before the electoral conference, before the ANC National Elective Conference. Why? You have pointed out to some of the things that are happening presently.
I do agree, by the way, with Mr. Mnguni. It's a definitional kind of issue as to whether you reached the crossroads earlier and what. I agree. The crisis started not today. It started, I think, mainly in Polokwane. And when we went to Mangaung, that still continued. The veterans asked, in light of this crisis that began that far back, perhaps triggered by the results, the negative results that the organization was experiencing, but really also as a result of the Constitutional Court decision on Gandla, when it said the president had abdicated, violated his oath of office. That was part of this continuing crisis. The veterans said, listen, let's sit down and talk. We are heading towards a precipice. We made very many overtures to the organization requesting that we sit and talk and call all and sundry who might be able to make a contribution towards saving the organization from its headlong plunge into a crisis. There was not a keenness to accept this invitation. I think the difference between the people who lead us now and others in the past is that you're getting a sense of insecurity, a lack of confidence, very sense.
Somebody was saying to me, the ANC treats its veterans as a family that takes the grandpa and grandma to an old age home and leave them there and forget about them.
Well, unfortunately, there are very many years of experience among the people who are concerned about what's going on here. And that's based precisely on the experiences of the ups and downs over years. And one can see the signs. And anyway, yes, the intention was always to have the ANC leadership take an active role in convening this conference so that we could talk about all these problems, whether they started in Polokwane or even before. I mean, you are talking about a country where the gap between the lowest paid and highest paid people is very high and widening. So that's an issue that has nothing necessarily to do with the current administration. Perhaps the development trajectory has not gone well. But there was a need, we said, to sit down and call whoever was willing to come forward, whether they were ANC in particular, and not ANC, but South African Democrats, citizens, willing to see change and improvement in the lives of the people. This was really not taken very seriously. There was always a defensiveness. They would agree today and it's something else tomorrow. And in the end, they wanted to hitch this to the policy conference before this day. The thing is, a consultative conference requires very serious preparation. By the time you get to those 3 days or 2, whatever is agreed, you have done extensive studies, developed papers, consulted on the variety of subjects that affect the movement, and then get to talk. We're not going to do that 2 days before the policy conference, and you don't know how to input the outcome of whatever was discussed into a policy thing.
Let's go back to, I'll come to you, Mr. Mnguni. I just want to finalize these issues around the Morogoro conference with Mr. Msimang. Let's go back to the Morogoro conference. Earlier, we did say in our discussion before the start of the show that the Morogoro conference issues were not insurmountable. Are issues insurmountable now?
Well, what would make them insurmountable now would be the intransigence of the people who lead, the lack of recognition that there is a crisis. It took a very long time. I don't know if the leadership now accepts that there is a crisis, but it took a long time for them to even agree that there was a crisis. So how do you sit down and solve a problem when you don't know that there is a problem?
The other thing for me is I read a paper by Nhlanhla Ndebele and Professor Noor Nifta-Hoden talk about the Morogoro conference being a moment of self-reflection. If Morogoro was a moment of self-reflection, then was the time not now ripe for a moment of self-reflection?
Well, let me just give you a little bit of background. The African National Congress and the Pan-Africanist Congress were banned in 1960, and a lot of damage was caused to the organizations. I can talk about the ANC. I mean, people were incarcerated, they went underground, others went to exile. So there was really no structure to take the movement forward, although decision had been taken that the banning of the ANC will not mean the death of the ANC. Mandela said, you know, there comes a moment in the life of an organization where they will decide whether you fold up and die or you go forward. So MK, Umkhonto we Sizwe, was established to continue this thing. Tambo was sent abroad to keep the ANC alive in the face of the banning that had taken place. Now, between that time, there was a conference that was held in Botswana in 1962. That's the first one that happens after the organizations have been banned. But the Morogoro conference happens almost a decade after the banning, 1969 from 1960. And there had been a whole range of problems. First of all, in our naivety, we had thought we would be out of South Africa and back in 6 months or a year fighting here, not taking into account that between Tanzania, where we had bases, and South Africa, you had several countries to go through. They had their own independence, their own security to safeguard, and so on. But there was a lot of tension, agitation about wanting to go home and fight, especially among people who had trained admirably well, but were sitting and doing nothing. But also there was the question of, with the banning of the organizations, you now had to deal with progressive people from the colored community, Indian community, who had operated within their own organizations. And now, although these were not banned in South Africa, what were they going to do? Were they going to come into the ANC, occupy what positions, and operate how? So there was a number of real things.
Let me just go back to Mr. Mnguni in Durban. Mr. Mnguni, what Mr. Msimang is talking about here is I was actually perplexed to find that it's only at the Morogoro conference in 1969 that the ANC decides to open up the organization for the coloreds, Indian and whites to join, yet the ANC adopted the Freedom Charter that says South Africa belongs to all who live in it a long time ago.
Well, you know, organizations evolve and they go through stages. I mean, the ANC is founded in 1912, but only creates a platform of real mass mobilization in the 1940s, with women being given equal membership status as men in about 1943. You see the launch of Women's League, Youth League, and all of that. So this is part of the evolution of an organization. I mean, the ANC had serious Pan-Africanists in it who didn't believe that they needed to be organized within ranks with other sectors of society for for the liberation of African people in particular. So that issue that it's only in 1969 is part of the ANC's evolution, that they allow other racial groups to be part of the movement. Of course, the SACP has become a very close ally of the ANC by that time, and already black people could be members of the SACP. So you have this mutualness between these two organizations in particular, that how do we then articulate more effectively between the ANC and the SACP? And this racial question also takes center stage in that context, I suppose. So it's part of that. But also, I mean, Morogoro happens at a time the ANC has just lost its president 2 years before that. In 1967, Chief Albert Luthuli dies. And there is this question, as Mr. Msimang puts it, of tensions about leadership in particular, and people want to have the authority of Oliver Tambo given effect by a conference. And so 1969 happens because he's always been calling himself an acting president, and some comrades I hear were always asking, if you are acting, when are you going to be president? And he wants to be confirmed by ANC structures. So it happens in 1969, and then he leads from there on. It is a movement, but the important thing to raise about this consultative conference is that it happens within the ANC. It happens with ANC leaders motivating and encouraging for it to happen. What you have a problem with now is a sense of parallel visions. The ANC has reached a point of parallel visions. I don't know if there are 2 or 3 or 4 parallel visions, but there is a problem of parallel visions. In 1969, there was clear unanimity on what the vision is and what is being pursued, who and what is the common enemy. Now, you absent all of these commonalities amongst members of an organization, you are bound to probably get an organization in disarray when they don't agree on vision, when they don't agree on, quote-unquote, the common enemy as well.
Here is an organization, Mr. Msimang, grounded 106 years, 105 years old, with a constitution, a very strong constitution. But what we have seen over the last couple of months are sections of this organization going to court for the court to interpret a constitution of this organization.
The constitution of the ANC needs updating, and that needs to be done very seriously. Mind you, the question of people going to the court is not really because of the deficiencies in the Constitution. They cite the Constitution and they say people are violating their own Constitution by doing things in a particular manner. That is the bone of contention around that. But some of the crises we have arise from the way in which we elect our leaders. It may have worked very well, and it did serve well in the past, to elect a person who was committed to participating in the improvement of the livelihood of the people, and that was the main, perhaps sole criterion for wanting to lead. We are in power now, and leading brings with it certain other factors that could be quite attractive to the incumbent of an important organization. So there is therefore a need, and this is one of the things that the veterans had been calling for almost a year ago, to say, let's review the Constitution and make sure that the things that we just very commonly refer to as factions and slates are done away with. They can be done away with. And I was reading the papers this morning, and there is somebody who is holding everybody to ransom, and he says, I want unity. You'll have to come to me. My name is David Mabuza. And, you know, this is all ridiculous. If you actually had a discussion in which you agree on how to elect your leaders, you wouldn't have this kind of nonsense.
Well, I was tweeting and I was saying the ANC needs to do something about it, because there is nothing of that sort in the ANC constitution, that you can have people who abstain and who only go to voice their vote in the election. What are they waiting for?
You know, all of a sudden we are saying we are not a mature democracy, we are not mature enough to elect people. Maybe the best thing is that we just have a consensus and go forward, all of us together, thieves and others. It's not. It might solve the short-term ANC problem. I'm not even sure that it would solve the national problem and the chances of the ANC doing well in the elections come 2019, because they will be looking at this hodgepodge of people who came together for the ANC and not dealing with issues that have to do with development and the questions you asked earlier.
Mr. Mgundi, you mentioned the SACP, the alliance between the SACP and the ANC. There is something else that happened this week, and that is the SACP finally taking the plunge and enter into politics on its own, and thus breaking with the past. This when they stood at without the alliance, outside of the alliance at Metsimahulu in the Free State. Is this the beginning of the end of the tripartite alliance, or is the tripartite alliance dead?
Well, I've often said the tripartite alliance has been limping for the longest time, and the biggest fallout in the tripartite alliance starts in 1996, when they left the SACP and COSATU defines GEAR at the time as, the 1996 class project, and really reject it and even take to the streets in a number of forms to oppose privatization of certain state-owned entities at the time. So that fallout then crystallizes to give crisis to the ANC. In actual fact, in 2005, finally, when the president then, Thabo Mbeki, dismisses his deputy country president, Jacob Zuma, members of the alliance find something to rally behind in that winter of 2005. And they rally behind the person of Jacob Zuma, and they see it as a moment to finally hit back at the president and so-called neoliberal policies, and put in a man of the people, put in, of course, that was the promise in any case, a man of the people as the new president, and chart a new way forward. And people really bought into this narrative and thought the ANC was going to start being pro-left, and it would center the voice of the SACP and COSATU in matters of the ANC. Of course, we now know 12 years on that the SACP and COSATU are now standing on polar opposite with the promised men of the people, and they are apologizing left, right and center. Even at the Veterans Consultative Council, I saw Solima Paila apologizing that they did not heed advice given to them by Ronnie Castles that this was not the right person to support as president. So the point I'm making is that what happens in Metsimahulu is a natural outcome of what has been going on within the alliance since 1996. The SACP, for its part, I've called it political carcass for the longest time, because it has stopped serving the purpose it used to serve within the alliance, and that was being an intellectual depository for the ANC, chatting, writing important papers in terms of political strategy, and in the 1970s, very important papers about the role of the military and the role of possibly negotiations in the future of political engagement of the ANC. Of course, the Sunset Clause comes into effect right in the heart of the CODESA negotiations, all seemingly coming from the SACP. Even in 2007, Jeremy Cronin writes a paper, The People Shall Govern, where he argues that supporting Jacob Zuma will not necessarily lead to a paradigm shift in the policy making of the ANC from a neoliberal perspective. So what is needed are more deeper commitments at the ANC conference, rather than around a man, but on the policy paradigm or policy framework of the movement. And of course, he was right, but they didn't heed their own advice in that paper. Come 10 years later, I have read an important paper that comes from the SACP that seeks to chart a way forward for our country. Instead, the SACP has become a base of factional politics and trying to influence the direction of ANC conferences, which is a pity really to a rich intellectual history of a movement that has now become compromised to being about personality politics.
Mr. Msimanga, I read the policy document. What drove me was organizational renewal, and in that, paragraph 242 says the Veterans League must remain a reservoir of wisdom and knowledge. But what happened to that now that it's being ignored?
I think that was the ideal. We've got 3 leagues. There were 2, Women's and the Youth League. And there was a decision taken in Polokwane that it would be good to also form a league consisting of people who are older than others in the organization, who could bring in their experience to help guide the organization and its leadership. That Veterans League really, most unfortunately, was stillborn. It never really took off. It was set up. It had a leader who has now left the organization, I think expelled, and it didn't call meetings. You wondered how the ANC accepted representation from the Veterans League at conferences, because you ought to be able to say my mandate is derived from a conference and so on. But that was all part of the problems that we are having now, when politics seems to have deserted the ANC. You know, Thabo Mbeki said something that was really dramatic the other day. He says it's as if a new group of people have occupied the highest echelons of the ANC. The actions that are taking place are very un-ANC. I mean, you don't see the things that are happening. They are not associated with the politics of the ANC. So the slogans will be out there. But for our organization to experience the kind of service delivery protests, counted in thousands annually, it says there's something that's gone wrong with politics.
Mr. Mnguni, the taking from what Mr. Msimang is saying, we normally talk about, especially in the corporate world, we talk about institutional memory. When you take people who know where this organization comes from and you lock them up in a room somewhere and you say, no, you are not part of us, are you not trying to avoid asking them to assist when there's a problem? They might know where things went wrong.
Well, for you to ask for their assistance, you must first accept that there is a problem that needs intervention. Absent of that admission, you will not seek answers. But also, when you have a glimpse into what those answers might be, and that the answers might point to you as the problem, you definitely will not, because then there's no political incentive for you to consult those veterans. And in any case, the biggest problem in the ANC is that the current leadership probably see themselves as veterans, because if they were not in leadership, they'd be sitting in those veterans leagues and veterans councils as well. So, but I want to start with the point on leagues. Leagues in the ANC were probably good at the time of mass mobilization, but post the democratic era and in a modern party, I really see leagues as an act of marginalization. They're a very crafty way of removing people from the mother body processes. So, for example, a 34-year-old today in the ANC who wants to be nominated, let's say, for Secretary General of the party, will be told that no, you can still be president of the Youth League, just stay there. And yet, if you see the influence of young people in the history of the ANC, the formation of the ANC, in leadership of the ANC, at serious moments of transition, even after 1948, when the National Party comes into power, your Oliver Tambos, your Walter Sisulu's, they are rising in the leadership ranks of the ANC at relatively young ages. So these leagues have been designed to margin.
My apologies, talk about that. Thabo Mbeki in his memorial lecture on O.R. Tambo speaks about the fact that in the 1940s, when the ANC was in paralysis during President A.B. Xuma's time, Oliver Tambo is elected Secretary General of the Youth League, and he helps the president to rebuild the ANC, to support what you're saying.
No, certainly. That youthful energy, not only youthful energy, commitment to vision, intellect in resolving problems. A.B. Xuma honestly finds the ANC in 1940 in a state of serious paralysis, almost collapse. And he rebuilds from his own pocket, as he was a medical doctor, he rebuilds with his own pocket the movement. He does away with factionalism, especially in the Transvaal, and he unites this movement movement, and then he allows the formation of the Youth League. People like Oliver Tambo, Anton Lembede unfortunately dies relatively very young and new in that process. But people like Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Mandela become part of that rebuilding of the ANC in a very important way under the leadership of Xuma. Again, what are we trying to say there is that if the leadership of the movement notes there is a crisis, consults in a manner that wants to resolve the crisis, he will receive support from across the spectrum of the movement. So what you have now is that veterans have been packaged into this league. So go and talk there, come to the NEC with your president and secretary, and let's engage the position of the Veterans League within the broader context. So once you have been put in the Veterans League, you have been put in the margins of the mother body organization. So let us lead as the NEC and respect our authority. So almost defined as a parallel structure, really, what was going on in that event of the veterans and stalwarts recently. So what you have, Mr. Mateza, is a problem of the movement having partitioned itself in a way that doesn't allow everybody to have equal say. So some are more equal than others. If you are in the NEC, you are definitely more equal than a voice that comes from any of the leagues. And part of reworking that constitution of the ANC is going to be a serious question of whether or not you maintain these leagues. And women are finding this probably also as a point of contention, because even the idea that it's a rallying cry to have the first female president or first female deputy president, it's because women feel they are not part of the mother body politics. The mother body politics are still subject to big men politics. And of course, Mr. Msimang noted the recent bullyism that is underway in the ANC of one man from Mpumalanga wanting to chart the course of the ANC. Again, not the most credible politician that there is in the ANC to craft. So the vision or the future of the ANC actually rests on hands that are said to be producing an ANC behavior. And you wonder really if it is going to be possible if the phone call is going to Mpumalanga more than it is going to Mr. Msimang with you there in studio.
The question is, Mr. Mnguni said there you are at the periphery of the organization. Yeah. And I seem to remember at some stage somebody said, no, the veterans must go to their branches.
Yeah. Yeah, you must pity these people sometimes. But I wanted to take issue a little bit with Prof. Mnguni on the issue of the leagues. The Veterans League is somewhat of a different thing. It might fall into the category that he's talking about. If people say you have what's the nice the experience,
the institutional memory.
The institutional memory, that's the expression I was looking for. You know, those things are available only to people who appreciate them, and he's absolutely right about that. The Youth League, we have such a serious youth problems in this country. If there was serious leadership, the fees must fall. The education system at basic level, the health system to do with primary health care and so on. These are issues that one would have thought a youth league of a leading progressive organization, if we still are, would be tackling.
Including unemployment.
Unemployment of
youth
young
unemployment,
people, you know.
For that matter.
So it's white monopolistic capital and who is president and so on. They are not excluded from discussing those things. But the primary issue for a youth league is to look at youth issues, and we have them galore here. Similarly with women, you are seeing a traditional leaders bill being passed which so disadvantages women, and the mother body seems for convenience to be agreeing with this policy. This is where the women should come in. Unfortunately, none of the people who are so eager now to talk about women's things, even talking about women's issues. I mean, I said in jest one day, and I want to apologize, that I think I could make a better women's leader than some of the people who want to be presidents of the Women's League. The issues of women just don't come into the agenda. I don't think you want a president who is a woman simply for gender. They qualify like men to be in the leadership, but there is a need to address women's issues. The example we have in Africa, of course, the leading light on these issues, on gender issues, was Thomas Sankara a man. But what's the agenda when people say they want a female leader? Is it to ensure that there is a parity of genders, or is it to address women's developmental issues?
If you'd like to join us in today's discussion, you can tweet us at Rights Recourse. You can also raise your issues on an email at rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Stay with us.
News, business, sports and weather from local and around the globe here on News Today.
It was important for me to nip all of these issues in the bud as they appear, so that we can give the assurance to the holders of pensions.
South Africa has more than 24,000 plant species which can be used to generate income for her citizens.
People believe that we as Africans have very little to offer the world in terms of science and technology.
The 24-year-old was the last rider to be caught after a break of more than 180 kilometers in Sunday's men's elite race at the World Road Championships in Bergen, Denmark. Smith is also the African road race champion, the South African race champion and the South African time trial champion.
Tune in to News Today every Monday to Friday from 3 to 5:30 p.m.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse as we discuss the Veterans League of the ANC and the state of the ANC leading to their elective conference in December, in about 2 weeks' time, yes. The Veterans League, Mr. Msimang and the stalwarts are going to attend the conference as part of the Veterans League delegation. Could the resolutions you adopted at the consultative conference find traction at the conference, or should they be submitted to the policy? Should they have been submitted to the policy conference?
Well, I'm glad you're asking the question. There is a distinction to be made here. There is the Veterans League, which is the structure of the ANC, and then there is the stalwarts one. The Veterans League has at long last been established, and there is some credible leadership, if I may say
Snooki
so.
Zikalala,
Snooki is there, but
backed by a very strong support system.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we have a mix of the old and the new, but at least you can see positions that are being taken. They are not dictated from anywhere else or meant to please certain people. They're based on their understanding of the issues. So that's the Veterans League. Umgoni here is really right. There is really an issue about where do you place the Veterans League, what is its role. I think with good intentions, people are saying, just sit there and be our advisors. You know, advisor, you can take the advice or not take it. There comes a time when you must also participate in discussing matters that will have to be taken on board because you're a constituent member of the entity. Now, the stalwarts and veterans came up with a declaration at the end of their 3-day conference, which, by the way, was so well attended. It had the alliance partners, never mind what Mngoni thinks about the SACP, but that's what we have, and they were represented at the highest available level. We had more than 60 community organizations, NGOs. We had quite a number of MECs coming in their private capacities, all structures.
I saw the Deputy Speaker there too.
The Deputy Speaker came there, yes, absolutely. You had ministers, past and present, participating in this meeting. You wondered why the leadership of the ANC, the current leadership, decided to excuse itself from this. And this is a body, I'm building a point to say that the declaration, we are going to try and get it presented to the structures, and they were members of the ANC, for adoption in part or in whatever form. One would hope, the expectation is that that document assists, guide whoever wins the elections at the end of the year. I don't know. That's the importance of that declaration. It talks about a need to restructure, to revisit the electoral system, among other things. It talks about the economy. All the things that sometimes are dismissed as just generic notions, but there is a need for whoever wants to lead the...
Is this, you're talking about the electoral system, is this the ANC electoral system or the national electoral system?
The ANC electoral system, and even influence, you know, Van
Slabbert was tasked to look at this issue,
that document
and he brought out a report.
That report needs to be brushed up and looked at. And
well, I think the committee that was led by former President Motlanthe, the high-level committee that was appointed by the Speakers Forum, actually makes that recommendation in the final report.
I think there is a need to take an active look at that, because again, there is no system, while there is no system that is a panacea to all these problems. The fact is that our experience now is that people's loyalty is to the people who make it possible for them to be in parliament through the list system. You know, it's not to a constituency. Even if you went to a constituency system, which I think would be an improvement on what we have now, you'll still need to put in place certain safeguards to make sure this thing. But it's a matter that needs to be.
Let me go back to Mr. Mnguni. Mr. Mnguni, do we as people in South Africa and our representative in Parliament appreciate the fact that we are a constitutional democracy, or is this some sort of irritations to some?
I think there is great appreciation that we are a constitutional democracy, but any democracy functions on the basis of the leadership that you choose. So if you have a leadership in institutionals, in your democratic institutions, and that leadership disregards the very constitution that is the bedrock, or what we call the social contract among citizens and those that lead. And so if they contravene the social contract with impunity, knowing full well that there will be no consequences for something like that, then it undermines the fact that we are a constitutional democracy. I mean, just look at some of the things that are going on around the country. If you listen to those life arbitration, you realize that some civil servants have no regard for human life, and in fact the very cornerstone of our constitution, which is an inalienable right, and that is the right to dignity, and at all times when you function, and hence the civil servants and government came up with the Charter to be as a way of communicating the contract between civil servants and those that they serve as citizens. I don't like calling citizens clients, because it introduces a different logic in one's mind. Citizens are just that, and they must be served by the public servants. So it is really in how we live up to the ethos of the Constitution. It is really how we handle each other on day-to-day matters. Even as citizens, I do not think Tatu Mateza, we really embody this constitutional democracy, because, as I said, the right to life for me is very important. You look at the murder rates in this country, look at the general violence in society and the brutality with which we resolve some issues. You look at gender-based violence that is so pervasive and perverse in our society, more to the point that women feel almost unsafe on a day-to-day basis and on every street corner that they turn. These are things that tell me we have not come to live into this constitutional democracy, because for me, constitutional democracy is not only embodied in the electoral system that we have. Much as that is important, the life cycle of elections is a 5-year. So what happens between these elections is what is most important. Public participation has become a tick box exercise in many ways than one, whether you are looking at how legislation is adopted or how policies of government are being put to citizens to consult on them. So in the sum total, we should have a much greater appreciation that we are constitutional democracy. And I think what has happened in recent times is that state capture, or as we know it, has really rallied society to say we have moved so far away from the values of this constitution, and so especially where accountability and transparency are concerned, and we need to recenter these very governance values. And I think we are starting to make gains, but we are making gains from a really low base in terms of appreciation of these things. And I think Mr. Msimang, for his role that he has played in government and especially at Home Affairs, has seen at face value, and not at face value, I mean at the cold face of the problems, what can go wrong when citizens are not serviced very well. And he's lauded much with the turnaround of Home Affairs. And the question is, how many more other civil servants have we had in this country that are committed? What you see now is a purging of those type of civil servants, whether you are in the Department of Social Development or in other departments. But we've seen a purging of committed civil servants that want to give life to that constitutional democracy we claim to be.
Mr. Msimang, you got a bouquet there from Mr. Mguni. the question here is, the stalwarts and the veterans have been very critical of the direction and the trajectory of the economy. The economy is taking, largely blames the leadership for the state of affairs. Is that as simple as that?
Well, it's complex. And I think, thank you very much to Umguni. I was with a group of very many good people at Home Affairs. And we did turn it around. We didn't solve everything. Corruption remained one of the big challenges. Now, to come back to the question of the economy, you know, when you behave in a manner that shows that you have no respect for your own laws or the Constitution, when there is a dominance of state capture, when there are high levels of corruption, you are actually frightening investors. Listen, whether you like them or not, we depend to a very large extent, given the nature of our economy. It's a free enterprise or capitalist economy, call it whatever, that runs on investment. Investors are not going to come into a country where the legal system is suspect, where they're not sure whether the contract they sign would be observed. That just has a direct impact on the economy. When you have a minister, as one of them said, I really want to spare him, saying, you know, since I became minister of such and such a thing, there is not a single investor that we registered in this country. You know, you create a xenophobia that is completely stupid, completely irrational. You know, the Constitution, you were asking a little earlier whether the Constitution is respected or not. If we did recognize that we're a constitutional democracy, the president would have, upon hearing what the judgment on his conduct of business was, he would have just said, I fall on my sword. I'm going.
In any other democracy.
And if he failed to do that, if the constitutional judges who cannot dismiss him had said, this is what has happened, Parliament would then have taken that up. So we are actually observing the constitutional tenets of our democracy more in the breach than anything else. But surely the economy, right now, I mean, countries that are similar to ours are doing much better than us in terms of GDP growth. We aren't there, so we can't quite explain our problems on the basis of the global economy. It affects us. But
I just want to go back to something else. You mentioned the Parliament should, if the judges had said X, Y, and Z, the Parliament itself came under scrutiny in that judgment, because by passing that resolution, the resolution they passed, the National Assembly effectively flouted its obligations. Neither the President nor the National Assembly was entitled to respond to the binding remedial action taken by the Public Protector, as if it is of no force or effect or has been set aside through a proper judicial process. So Parliament itself should look at itself, and I think one of the opposition parties say they are still going to take Parliament to court because Parliament has not done nothing about the judgment that was skating about itself.
They really missed the boat there, and unfortunately on a very key constitutional matter. All I can say, I mean, I agree with what Umguni says, is I take courage in what I see, where you've got ad hoc committees now dealing with issues which 2 years ago would have just been dismissed as either initiatives of the DA, where they are calling the executive to account. Ministers are becoming very uncomfortable because this is not just a walkover that will be protected by an ANC majority which supports us as a government. Parliament is beginning, and I think we need to recognize that and commend them for doing it.
Mr. Mgudi, we have seen there are a couple of glitches. We have a glitch in the Eastern Cape, we have a huge glitch in KwaZulu-Natal in terms of nominations for the Eastern Cape actually nominated, but there's still a question mark around the executive down there, and the big question mark in KwaZulu-Natal. What should we expect going forward to December the 16th?
Well, the National Executive Committee of the ANC is in session today, if I'm made to believe correctly, and I'm hopeful that one of the things they will do most is to have credibility in how they resolve all these disputes and appeals that are coming from branches. Even though the Eastern Cape announced in its PGC who its preferred candidates are, the secretary there also indicated that there are still about 62 branches that need to be resolved in terms of disputes and appeals. Well, of course, you go to the Free State, you are here in KZN. This is the legacy of these past 10 years of the ANC, where credibility is really found wanting on all fronts within the organization. Young people will tell you they are unsatisfied with the leadership of the youth and so on. Same with the Women's League, they will tell you the same thing. So you've got a serious credibility crisis in the ANC, and it can't occupy the moral high ground that it used to. Now, preparing for conference, what is important is to close all these loopholes and to make a legal challenge that would probably interdict the national conference successfully not to be possible, because we saw it in the Free State. The Free State was meant to be in session this weekend in a conference, and it hasn't happened because there was a successful interdict. The second thing that is important is the spirit with which delegates go to that conference in. And you know, if there's one thing that David Mabuza has said in the recent days, it's something he said in one of the papers today, that you need delegates to go there with the right mind frame, because if they go with the mind of possibly collapsing the conference, this conference is going to collapse, and that is a serious problem, which I hope the veterans will give some guidance, because you see, at a national conference, if that conference collapses, there's no structure to tend to. It creates an internal constitutional crisis for the ANC, and I'm not hearing enough from the ANC and even from the veterans to say, comrades, let us make sure that at least this conference goes ahead, because what then happens is that you revert to the status quo of the current National Executive Committee, but for how long if a national conference has collapsed? Because it takes serious resources, serious organizing to convene a national conference. And what would make the next one not collapse? How long must you wait for another time for the conference not to collapse? So for me, I think it is those things. You need one, credible processes that can be legally challenged, so you abide by the ANC Constitution and its guidelines for conference. And lastly, you charge the delegates with the right mind frame and spirit that if we collapse this national conference, we collapse the ANC project entirely as a political party.
Final word from you, Mr. Msimang. The question I want to ask finally was, with all of these issues swirling around the ANC, do you fear for the integrity of the conference?
I do have a concern, like many other South Africans. Mngoni just refers to certain possibilities. I'm really not very good at projecting and so on. fact of the matter is, though, this conference is being held under very imperfect conditions. The same issues that bring in the David Mabundas are the issues that ought to have been resolved, so that you are certain that the people who want to lead, or whom you want to lead the organization, are fit for purpose, that they are elected in a manner that is quite unassailable in terms of its violation. But you know, let's face it, one is in a pragmatic, we must be pragmatic about these things. The conference is taking place. I do wish that it continues, and I hope that a non-captured person emerges as the winner at the end of it.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. We can't solve, it so happens that we can't solve all the ANC problems in this program. This has been Right and Recourse. This program is repeated on Monday morning. From all of us in the studio, thank you very much to our guest, and goodbye.